Now, before we turn to First Minister's questions, may I invite members to join me in welcoming to our gallery Andrei Parubi, MP, Chairman of the Verkhovna Rada, the Parliament of Ukraine, to this chamber. Thank you. We turn now to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, I called on the First Minister to put on hold her plans to increase the number of criminals being tagged in the community rather than being kept in prison, and I want to return to that issue this week. Can I ask her if she really thinks she has the confidence of victims and the wider public for those plans?
First Minister.
Well, as I said last week, a full review instructed by the Justice Secretary, in fact 2 reviews, one by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, one by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons, will look at the circumstances of the case that we were discussing in this chamber last week, and any recommendations from those reviews will be properly acted on by the Scottish Government. Beyond that, I do think it is important that we have a justice system that punishes people for the crimes that they commit, that punishes people properly for the crimes that they commit, but also works to rehabilitate people where possible. And that's why some of the processes and systems that we discussed last week are in place. They are in place not simply for the benefit of those who commit crimes, but much more importantly, they are in place for the benefit of wider society. Because better rehabilitation, we know, helps to reduce reoffending. That's something that I think Ruth Davidson's colleagues in the UK Government south of the border recognise, and I do believe it's something that most people across Scotland also recognise.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank you. The truth is, it's not at all clear how the Government's plans contained within its Management of Offenders Bill will put victims first. And let me give an example. The First Minister is proposing to release more criminals back to communities. And under those plans, a serious offender could be released from prison, could be given a tag, cut it off, breach the terms of their release, and yet, incredibly, that wouldn't automatically be considered an offence. That's what it says in the bill. I think that is plain wrong, doesn't the First Minister?
First Minister.
As Ruth Davidson has herself indicated in how she's characterised this, this is a bill that is before Parliament for proper debate, scrutiny, discussion and in due course for appropriate amendment. But it is the case, of course, that breaches of home detention curfew are taken very seriously. In terms of the processes that are underway right now, there are clear processes in place where an individual fails to comply with the conditions of their curfew. If the conditions are considered to be breached, the prison service will revoke the individual's licence and issue a recall order. Police Scotland is notified and makes arrangements to apprehend the prisoner. So there are processes in place. It is important, though, that we always keep these processes under review, so that when cases such as the one we were talking about last week happen, and thankfully these are rare cases, although that offers no comfort to the family affected in that case. But where situations like that arise, we review that properly, and if there are lessons or changes that require to be made, then we take action to do that.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, I hope that was a hint, even if it was a soft hint, that she's prepared to listen on this specific issue, because it's not just me that's calling for change here. It's also groups like Scottish Women's Aid, who represent the victims of domestic violence. They say that the safety and security of individual victims of crime must be the critical consideration when assessing suitability for release on electronic monitoring. And on the specific issue of tagging, they say that to be a credible deterrent, breach of the electronic monitoring condition must be an automatic criminal offence. I believe they're right on both points. Will the First Minister give a commitment now to amending this bill to ensure that breach of electronic tagging is treated for what it should be, and that is a crime?
First Minister.
I agree that where people breach any conditions in which they're released into the community, then the situation should be that they are returned to prison. These decisions are rightly taken in some cases by the Scottish Prison Service, in other cases by the Parole Board, and of course in many cases these are decisions for the independent judiciary. We will listen to the case for any amendments that are proposed to this bill, and I hope the Parliament will discuss this in a very open and mature way. It is, I think, also important to point out that home detention curfew, for example, is used only with a very small proportion of the prison population. Approximately 4% of the prison population at any time will be on home detention curfew, which is the same proportion, as I understand it, of prisoners on home detention curfew in England and Wales. So this is something that is not used for the majority of prisoners, but where a case is made, it can help to aid rehabilitation. And I actually, Ruth Davidson asked me if I agreed with others that she cited, and in terms of the substance of those quotes, I agree with the sentiment expressed there, and we will debate the detail of that. But I actually agree very much with this quote as well. Of course, the rehabilitation of criminals is a vital part of the justice system. That is why we have parole and home detention. The aim is to ensure that criminals are reintegrated with their communities, so we avoid the kind of revolving door that sees criminals return to jail over and over again. I agree with that quote. It's a quote from Ruth Davidson on the 6th of June this year.
Ruth Davidson.
We are absolutely happy on these benches to bring forward such amendments on this issue, but what I want to know is whether the First Minister will back them. Because, Presiding Officer, this government is planning to release more convicted criminals into the community, and victims are asking why perpetrators are being put back on the streets. Now, the First Minister admitted last week that there are scores of offenders in the community who should be being monitored, but instead are unlawfully at large. And now her government has brought forward a bill which aims to increase the number of offenders being released. But it says to them, take off your tag, breach the terms of your licence, but no need to worry because you'll face no further charges. Now, we've got a chance here to rebuild trust in our justice system, but to do so, it's not an offenders bill we need, it's a victims bill. So isn't it time that the First Minister went back to the drawing board and began again with a bill that will show victims that their rights come before criminals for once?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, I think Ruth Davidson has completely mischaracterised the proposals brought forward by the Scottish Government, would be my first point. My second point, I have to say, having read out the quote from Ruth Davidson that I shared with the Chamber a moment ago and listening to her just now, I'm not sure the Tories know what their position is on these matters. So before we get to proper debate on the bill, perhaps the Tories will have sorted out their own position before they can try and persuade the Chamber of anything. In terms of amendments, we will look carefully and properly consider any amendment that's brought forward. It stands to reason I'm not going to give commitments right now to supporting amendments that I haven't even seen and the government hasn't even seen. But we will look carefully and consider all amendments. They will be properly debated in this chamber. I certainly hope the parliamentary authorities will allow more than 15 minutes debate for all of these important issues. And we will take decisions that are in the best interest of the victims of crime and of wider society. It is absolutely right and proper that we have a justice system in which I believe there is trust in this country. We have a justice system that punishes those who commit crimes. The idea that Scotland, with one of the highest prison populations in the whole of Western Europe, is a soft touch when it comes to justice simply does not bear any scrutiny. So we will ensure that we have a justice system that punishes criminals, but also ones that aids the wider interest of rehabilitation offenders, because as Ruth Davidson herself says, that is in the interest of victims of crime and it is in the interest of the country as a whole. And we will continue to take all of these matters into account in a mature and responsible way.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, can she give us another word for a hummingbird's beak?
First Minister.
Not immediately, no.
Richard Leonard.
Well, that's rather unfortunate because the hummingbird's beak question is one of the government's standardised assessment literacy questions for 5-year-olds. For 5-year-olds, Presiding Officer. Little wonder that Scotland's teachers have told me how young, confident children are crushed by these tests. And there have been reports of children driven to tears. Children driven to tears. The educational charity Upstart says these tests are not only pointless and highly counterproductive, worse, they are an adverse childhood experience. And yet, at the SNP conference 6 days ago, John Swinney claimed, and I quote him, a renaissance in Scottish education. First Minister, what kind of renaissance is it that includes 5-year-olds being driven to tears?
First Minister.
I don't know. I don't know what Richard Leonard was doing yesterday. Perhaps he can tell us later on. But yesterday morning, I was spending my time in 2 primary schools, actually, as well as a secondary school and an early years centre, all part of the fantastic new Largs campus, which make up the more than 750 schools that have been built or modernised under this government. And I was talking to a range of primary school children, including, I have to say, some 5-year-olds. I didn't meet any of them in tears. I didn't see any of them that looked crushed. What I saw were confident, bright, enthusiastic young people. Some of those primary school children were showing me computer coding. Others were speaking Mandarin to me. That's how confident they were. Others were taking me outside to show me the things that we're doing in their outdoor nursery. These were confident young people showing the best of Scottish education. And I think it is shameful for Richard Leonard to come to this chamber and talk about our young people in the way that he just has. But let me also say this. We are determined, as I have said on so many occasions, to continue to raise standards in our schools and to close the attainment gap. And being able to assess in an appropriate and an age-appropriate way how our young people are doing in school is an important part of that. And we will continue to work hard to make sure we do that. And we will do it in a way that is entirely appropriate. But I'm proud of what I saw in Largs yesterday, and I'm proud of what's happening across Scottish education.
Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, these tests have been flawed from the very start. Delivered late, £2 million over budget, and weeks of valuable teaching time lost. This morning, I spoke to a Primary 1 teacher from Edinburgh. She's in school every day of the week. And what she said to me was, administering these tests to our 54 Primary 1 children took approximately 30 hours of teacher time for numeracy and 40 hours for literacy. And she continued, having watched the children complete the tests, I also have no confidence in the validity of the assessment. I cannot use the data from these tests to support my teaching in any way. It does not provide reliable information on any aspect of my children's learning or development. The Education Secretary once promised that teachers could stop doing anything which did not support learning. So, First Minister, will you stop standardised testing for 5-year-olds now and put pupils first?
First Minister.
We will continue to listen to teachers, and we will continue to consider the feedback of teachers. Perhaps Labour want to listen to the answer. For example, it's because we listened to teachers before the assessments were introduced that we took the decision not to insist that they were carried out at a particular point of the year. Teachers can use their judgment and discretion around that. There have been almost 600,000 assessments successfully carried out so far. The vast majority of teacher feedback, as I understand it, has been positive about the depth of the diagnostic information available. The assessments are not high-stakes assessment. There's not a pass or a fail for these assessments. They are one part of a range of evidence that a teacher will gather on a child or a young person's progress. And I don't know about Richard Leonard, but I think it's right that we're able to assess the progress of children in our school. Because at a very fundamental level, if we don't know how our young people are performing, how can we make sure we are taking action to improve standards in our schools? Teacher judgment, and we've been very clear about this, continues to be the priority, but this is another area in which teachers can inform that judgment. We are determined we're going to continue to raise standards and close the attainment gap. And week after week, we hear members on Labour benches calling for that to be done. But they manage to oppose almost everything we do to bring it about. It's about, willing the ends, but not having the ability or the courage to will the means. Well, we are determined to take the action, not just talk the talk, as Labour so often do.
And we have some constituency supplementaries. The first from Finlay Carson.
Officer, this week we have unfortunately seen yet more job losses in Dumfries and Galloway. The owners of Corson's, a much-loved family-run business with over 400 years of history, have taken the tough decision to close their 4 shops in my constituency, resulting in 34 redundancies. Now, 34 jobs may not be a huge figure in terms of Scotland-wide, but in a small rural community, losses of this level are significant. In other circumstances, help has been provided, so will the First Minister outline what support the Scottish Government can give to the company and workers facing redundancy?
First Minister.
Raising an issue is an important issue, and it's deeply regrettable that the decision that he has outlined today has been taken by Corson's. The Scottish Government, as we do in all of these situations, will offer any assistance we can to the company to try to mitigate job losses, but we will also ensure that our PACE initiative is working with any affected employees to help them into alternative employment. I'm more than happy to ask the Economy Minister to correspond directly with the member to set out in more detail what can be done, and of course listen to any suggestions as to what the Scottish Government can do. Of course, while this does not take away from the impact in this particular case, we've also seen the latest labour market statistics this week showing that employment in Scotland continues to rise and unemployment remains at a very low level. So that is a good overall position, but within that we'll continue to take whatever action we can to support individual businesses and individual groups of employees.
Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, my constituent, 10-year-old Georgie Kakava, tragically lost his mother Sophie in February whilst going through the UK asylum process. Georgie only knows Springburn in Scotland, having been here since he was 3 years old. He attends the local school, has good friends and a community who want to protect and support him. 70,000 people have signed a petition calling for Georgie not to be deported and to stay in Scotland with his gran, Coutinho. Does the First Minister agree with me that Georgie's case must be conducted by the Home Office with compassion and move quickly to give certainty, safety and security to Georgie? And can I also ask the First Minister to make representations to the Home Secretary, as I have done, making the case that Scotland is Georgie's home and it's where he should grow up?
First Minister.
This is a really tragic situation, and it's absolutely heartbreaking to hear what Georgie has been through. That said, I've been, and I'm sure everybody has been, deeply touched to hear how the local community in Springburn has rallied round, really proving that people do make Glasgow. In achieving over 70,000 signatures, Reverend Brian Casey's petition shows the strength of feeling that people have for a child who has lost his parents and has only ever known Scotland, our country, as his home. Georgie's case needs common sense, but above all it needs compassion, and I hope the Home Office will urgently review it with Georgie's best interests at the heart of their decision-making. In fact, with Georgie's best interests as the only factor in their decision-making. And I hope the outcome of this case is that Georgie is allowed to stay here, grow up here, and I'm sure as he gets older, make a fantastic contribution to the country, not only that he calls home, but I think the country that considers Scotland to be his home.
Neil Findlay.
Across West Lothian, first bus are reducing the frequency of services and cutting routes, impacting on thousands of passengers who rely on buses for work or to reach public services like hospitals and GP surgeries, or for shopping and socialising. Bus passengers and communities appear to have no rights when it comes to service reductions. Can the First Minister advise what passengers can do in the here and now to prevent these cuts to services, or do they just have to accept it?
First Minister.
Well, I will ask the Transport Minister to look at the specific situation in West Lothian and correspond with Neil Findlay. I know in my own constituency I regularly take up complaints and issues and concerns with bus services, with bus companies, and I'm sure local members will do the same. Of course, this week saw the introduction of the new Transport Bill, which has very much the issue of bus services at its heart, and I hope all members will engage constructively with that as we ensure that we're doing everything possible to encourage more people to use buses and also encourage local authorities and bus companies to provide the services that people want and need.
Miles Briggs.
First Minister, my office has been inundated with emails and letters from patients across Lothian who are facing a wait of up to 45 weeks just for an initial orthopaedic appointment before they can even be added to the operating waiting list. The Health Secretary assured me repeatedly that improvements would be made by April of this year. Will the First Minister now apologise to my constituents who need hip and knee replacements and have been given the orthopaedic crisis we now see across NHS Lothian, what does she suggest I tell my constituents who are waiting in pain at the hands of this SNP government?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, I would apologise to any patient that waits longer for treatment on the health service than they should do. As Miles Briggs is aware, the Health Secretary is working hard with local health boards, including NHS Lothian, to reduce waiting times in these areas, and orthopaedics is a priority area. She recently announced additional funding to help local health boards do exactly that. The additional funding that was invested to reduce outpatient waiting times, according to the most recent statistics, has had an impact, and we are obviously wanting to focus on elective inpatient treatment as well. If Miles Briggs wants to write to the Health Secretary with details of individual constituency cases, then I'm more than happy to ask the Health Secretary to look into them in particular. But we will continue to take the action, both in terms of investment and also reform around our health service, to make sure that waiting times come down and patients continue to get the services that they need.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm not hugely surprised that neither the Conservatives nor the Labour Party chose to raise the current constitutional crisis and the decision by the UK government to unilaterally abolish the principle of devolved consent. This situation has understandably led to anger at Westminster, and I think none of Scotland's representatives should show any patience with the contempt that is being shown. But it also greatly increases the urgency of giving the people of Scotland the ability to control their own future instead of dragging them into the chaos of Brexit Britain. So does the First Minister in that context understand the concerns that many have expressed that the SNP's Growth Commission has taken too many lessons from a right-of-centre economic agenda like the previous New Zealand government, which cannot offer the transformative alternative that's needed if we're going to inspire the people of Scotland to choose a better future?
First Minister.
No, I don't actually. I think the Growth Commission offers the alternative to austerity that this country so badly needs, and offers a future based on hope, not the despair of Brexit. But I'd say this to Patrick Harvey: when Scotland is independent, he'll be perfectly entitled to put forward different ideas, and the people of Scotland can choose, because that's what independence is about, allowing the people of Scotland to decide their own future, not have it decided for us by a Tory government at Westminster. And in terms of developments this week, what we saw this week was the most clear and powerful evidence so far that the Westminster system simply does not work for Scotland. The Tories plan to remove powers from this Parliament without the consent of this Parliament. Yeah. They ripped up the convention that has underpinned devolution for nigh on 20 years. They did so in the most contemptuous way possible, with a 15-minute debate and no opportunity for a single Scottish MP to get to speak. And they hoped that nobody would notice. Well, thanks to SNP MPs doing their job, standing up for Scotland, people have noticed. People are angry, people are talking about it, people are expressing that anger in different ways. Since lunchtime yesterday, 5,085 of them have expressed their anger by joining the SNP. You know, Adam Tompkins, who was shouting from a sedentary position, recently said this: the political price of enacting legislation without the consent of the Scottish Parliament might be quite significant. Well, I think the Tories are about to find out just how right on that issue Adam Tompkins is.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm sure the First Minister didn't mean to ignore the questions around the Growth Commission which I raised. She says that we should offer new ideas in the future once we're independent. Well, we will do, but we're doing so already. And in fact, New Zealand, one of the countries the Growth Commission relies on for its argument, is already putting new ideas into practice. And I would refer to the comments about the Growth Commission from Gareth Hughes, a Green MP from New Zealand, who says that after being one of the most egalitarian countries, New Zealand witnessed the fastest growth in inequality in the developed world. They saw a dramatic rise in homelessness, precarious working conditions and child poverty as a result of the light-handed regulation, small state and punitive welfare reform agenda. Now New Zealand has a new government and a new direction focused on fair distribution of wealth, government returning to the task of supporting housing instead of leaving it to a failed market, an ambitious zero carbon goal, and looking beyond measures like simplistic GDP growth. After decades of a trickle-down austerity ideology, he said, we're changing direction. Isn't it clear that the New Zealand of today offers a more forward-looking, progressive model than the failed dead-end agenda which the Growth Commission has drawn from?
First Minister.
Well, forgive me, I'm actually more interested in the Scotland of today and the Scotland of tomorrow that can be so much better with the powers of independence. Now, look at the Growth Commission. If the recommendations of the Growth Commission had been applied in the years since the Tories came to power at Westminster, the reduction we've seen in public spending in Scotland would have been wiped out, and actually more than wiped out. That reduction would have been turned into an increase in public spending, the eradication of austerity. This is about how we get an alternative to austerity. And it's about a debate about how we maximise the vast potential of this great country of ours. And isn't that a much better alternative to constantly be talking about the despair of Brexit? So let's have that debate. It's a debate about hope and optimism, and it's one that I think more and more people across Scotland are desperate to have, and I really look forward to that.
I may have some further supplementaries. The first from David Stewart.
Presiding Officer, the 14th of June 2017 is the date that will go down in infamy. The Grenfell Tower disaster claimed 72 lives. Does the First Minister share my view that the best way to honour the 72 lives lost is to ensure that such a tragedy can never happen again? Will the First Minister support my member's bill to provide sprinklers in all new social housing?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I thank David Stewart for his question. I think all of our thoughts today are with those who lost loved ones, those who were injured, those who were made homeless in Grenfell a year ago today. Our hearts break for them every day, but particularly today as they mark the one-year anniversary. Of course, the importance of these issues have been brought home to us today, and certainly been brought home to me with the fire in the tower block in the Gorbals in my own constituency. I am glad to say, having spoken to the Chief Fire Officer earlier this morning, that fire is under control, and I want to put on record my thanks to all of our firefighters for the work they did this morning in containing and extinguishing that fire. I will certainly be working as local MSP to offer help to those who I understand may have to be rehoused because of understandable water damage that's been done to that. But that incident brings home the importance of making sure that we have robust fire safety procedures in place, particularly in high-rise tower blocks. As Dave Stewart is aware, the two review panels that were set up in the wake of Grenfell to advise the Scottish Government reported their recommendations yesterday. The Ministerial Working Group has accepted the panel's recommendations. The recommendations are wide-ranging. I can't go into all of them right now, but one of the proposals is to expand the use of sprinkler systems to improve fire safety. I'm aware of David Stewart's private member's bill and thank him for bringing that proposal forward. The Scottish Government is considering his final proposal, and as I believe he understands, we will inform Parliament of our decision in that regard by the deadline that's been set, which is the 21st of June. But I hope we can work constructively with Dave Stewart to make sure that on the issue of sprinklers, as on the other issues covered by these two reports, we are taking all appropriate action to make sure that people are safe from fire and that all appropriate steps are in place. But for now, I thank David Stewart for raising what is a very important, as well, of course, is a very topical issue today.
Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister to be aware of the havoc that Storm Hector is causing right across Scotland, with many lifeline ferries, trains and flights being cancelled or delayed, roads blocked, and many on our island and rural communities are cut off. In my region, there are neither ferries nor trains operating out of Ardrossan. Given that this patch of adverse weather was well forecasted and, in the words of the Transport Minister, was predicted, nor is it unusual in Scotland. Can I ask the First Minister what government pre-planning has gone into ensuring our transport and road networks are resilient enough to cope with this difficult weather? And can I also ask what contingency plans are currently in place to assist those affected with a view to getting Scotland moving again?
First Minister.
Well, our resilience arrangements always take steps to ensure that we are as well prepared as we can be for adverse weather. I think most people across the country realise, though, that even when bad weather is predicted, even when all due contingency plans are put in place, it's not possible to stop all of the impact that the bad weather has. And public safety always has to come first, which is why decisions regrettably often have to be taken to cancel ferries or to cancel other transport services. But we will be working, and resilience officials, the Transport Minister in particular, will be working to make sure that any disruption is kept to a minimum and that the services get back to normal as quickly as possible. And in my experience, while of course nobody wants to see weather-related inconvenience, the vast majority of the public understand the situation that arises in these circumstances and are very patient with the arrangements that have to be put in place, and I would thank them for that.
John Finney.
Thank you, President Officer. The First Minister will be aware it's 5 years this month since Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland announced he directed Police Scotland to inquire into the vile practice of rendition, which saw people abducted and transported for torture. Various Scottish airports were implicated, including Inverness and Wick in my region, both of which the FM will know are operated by HIAL on behalf of Scottish ministers. Will the First Minister provide a progress report on this inquiry and request the Lord Advocate come to the Chamber to provide a detailed update?
First Minister.
Well, of course, the Lord Advocate carries out these investigations completely independently of ministers. It's right and proper that he does so, so it would not be appropriate for me to seek to instruct the Lord Advocate in any aspect of his independent role. I will, however, pass on John Finney's comments to the Lord Advocate. I'm sure he will be listening carefully anyway, or these comments will be reported to him, but I will ensure he's aware of them and ask the Lord Advocate to get in touch with John Finney to give a progress report to the extent that he is able to do so, and I hope that will be helpful to the member.
Move on to question 4, Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the First Minister whether she should provide an update on the impact of the EU withdrawal bill on Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, the most immediate impact is that the UK Government this week, for the first time since the establishment of the Scottish Parliament, decided to press ahead with legislation on devolved matters without the consent of this Parliament. In doing so, it has taken an unprecedented step and overturned the rules of our constitutional arrangements, which have never before been broken in the history of devolution. The fact that the overwhelming vote in this Parliament was casually cast aside in just 15 minutes in the House of Commons without any debate and without a single Scottish MP having the opportunity to speak, in my view, demonstrates beyond all doubt the utter contempt the Tories have for devolution and for the interests of the people of Scotland.
Bruce Crawford.
I thank the First Minister for her answer. Does she agree with me that the Tories never wanted devolution in the first place? That their latest democratic outrage proves that they are prepared to undermine devolution purely to suit Tory party needs, regardless of the consequences for Scotland? And does she also agree that Ruth Davidson's Tories will pay a heavy price for supporting this naked power grab of devolved responsibilities?
First Minister.
I think it's been demonstrated beyond any doubt that the Tories can't be trusted with devolution. They cannot be trusted now or ever with the Scottish Parliament. The Tories campaigned against devolution 20 years ago. We now know, of course, that Ruth Davidson was furious at the vow, suggesting more powers for this Parliament. So they didn't even want this Parliament to have extended powers. Of course, the architect of the vow today has said that he now supports independence, so disgusted is he at the power grab of the Conservatives. The fact of the matter is the Tories are trying to take powers away from this Parliament without the consent of this Parliament. They're doing it in areas that matter: fishing, agriculture, trade, environmental protections, consumer protections, food safety. These are issues that matter. It is simply not acceptable for the powers of this Parliament to be constrained for up to 7 years without our consent. That's what the Tories thought they could get away with this week. Well, it turns out they can't get away with it. And I think they're going to pay a very, very heavy political price indeed, and they will thoroughly deserve to.
Question number 5, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that Yammer, which is a social network available in every school, is being used to target vulnerable children.
First Minister.
Well, I take safeguarding of children, information security and data protection very seriously. It is not acceptable for any child to be exposed to inappropriate content online. However, I want to be very clear that we have no indication that vulnerable children are being targeted through Yammer in the GLOW system. It is critical that offensive material is reported and removed as soon as it is identified. While all relevant issues are examined and as a precaution, access to Yammer was removed on Friday the 8th of June, while Education Scotland undertakes a full review. Education Scotland officials also met with the parent who first raised concerns and the school to discuss the issue.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, but teachers did raise concerns over 18 months ago. The system's own risk assessment noted pupils could be subject to individuals wishing to do harm to them. And parents did try to raise issues with Education Scotland and their local education staff. So can I ask the First Minister, in simple terms, why were the warnings not listened to? Who is responsible? And how are we going to ensure that individuals are accountable?
First Minister.
Well, this issue first came to my attention, if memory serves me correctly, last Thursday when a parent emailed me. The system was taken down on Friday while the concerns are fully investigated. In terms of the oversight of this and the review, Education Scotland is responsible. As I understand it, the levels of access to GLOW and to Yammer are decided at a local authority level, but the site has been taken down, and it's right that that action has been taken because we must act on the precautionary basis when the safety of children are concerned. I do, however, want to be very clear about this. Based on the information that is available to me right now, there is no evidence to suggest that GLOW has been compromised. The offending content identified by the parent, as far as I understand it, was not content put there by an unauthorised user of the system. It was created by a secondary school-age pupil who has since been removed from GLOW, as has the content that was put there. So this is a serious issue, and nobody in the government or in Education Scotland is trying to underplay it, but it is important that a proper review takes place. We know there are educational benefits to giving young people access to systems like this, but we must absolutely make sure that safety is a priority, and that's what we will continue to do.
Gillian Martin.
Presiding Officer, at a recent meeting I had with Bernardo's in Aberdeen, they told me that they estimate around 46% of children using various social media apps and online platforms had their settings at public, which of course means that anyone can see their content and can contact them. Does the First Minister think we can be doing more to highlight online safety to children at a young age, given so many have access to social media before the age required by these platforms?
First Minister.
Yes, I do, and I think that is a very important point that Gillian Martin has raised. I think it would be good for all of us to think about online conduct and safety, and particularly where children are concerned, for parents to have access to the advice and information that allows them to ensure that children are using social media in a way that prioritises their safety. So I will certainly give an undertaking today that the Scottish Government will consider whether there's more we can do to ensure that parents and teachers and anyone working with young people have the knowledge and understanding to enable them to give appropriate advice to young people. I think we've discussed these issues in the Chamber before. It's important, the internet, social media is on balance a force for good. It opens worlds to children that they may not otherwise be able to experience, but it also does give access, or potentially gives access, to those who would want to do harm to children. So we must make sure that safety is the absolute priority. And since these concerns were raised last week, that's what Education Scotland and the Government and the Deputy First Minister has been very involved in discussions with Education Scotland about this. That's what we've been seeking to do, and it's what we will continue to do.
Question number 6, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government is marking Carers Week.
First Minister.
Well, this week, Carers Week marked the remarkable contribution that all of the 788,000 carers across Scotland make to both the friends and family they care for, but also to wider society. I appreciate all that carers do, and we are committed to supporting them as much as we can. That's why we've invested nearly £143 million in a range of carer support since 2007, and we will spend a further £30 million a year increasing carers allowance from this summer, which will benefit 70,000 carers, and from next year we will introduce the new £300 Young Carer Grant. To mark Carers Week, the Minister for Public Health opened Vocal's new Carers Hub in Leith, which will help improve the support Vocal can offer to carers across Edinburgh and Midlothian. Our Carers Act has established new rights to support carers since April, which organisations like Vocal and other local carer centres across the country are crucial in delivering.
Claire Adamson.
Can I thank the First Minister for her answer, and I'm sure everyone in the Chamber welcomes the commitment to increase carers allowance in Scotland to £500 a year, an increase that will be backdated to April. Does the First Minister agree that this is in recognition of the valuable jobs that carers do, and can she set out how else her government plans on supporting carers through the course of the Parliament, and how she can encourage members to sign up to be carer-friendly employers?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, we will continue to take action to support carers as much as possible. There's a range of support available under the new Carers Act. One of these areas of support, of course, is about giving carers in their own right the right to have a plan for their own needs. That is a major advance in carers' rights, and it remains a priority for the government to make sure it delivers real change for carers across the country. As well as the carers allowance supplement, which I've already spoken about, we will increase carers allowance in line with inflation each year, and we're committed to delivering an additional payment to carers of more than one disabled child. I've already mentioned the new Young Carer Grant of £300 for young people over 16 with significant caring responsibilities. That will be part of a package of support for young carers who are not in receipt of carers allowance, and it will include free bus travel. In addition, we're introducing a carers element to the Young Scot National Entitlement Card, providing non-cash benefits for young carers from the age of 11 to 18. And lastly, we will continue to promote the Carer Positive scheme, which encourages employers to create supportive working environments for carers. We can never fully repay the debt that as a country we owe to carers, but in all of these ways that I've talked about, and in any additional way that we can, it is our duty to support them as much as we possibly can.
Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And the First Minister has highlighted many very welcome changes during Carers Week, and Labour colleagues and people across the Chamber support the increase in the carers allowance she's referred to be the same as job seekers allowance. Having been a young carer myself and as a co-convener with Graham Day for the cross-party group for carers, I'm keenly aware of the challenges they face. There has been some confusion about the carers allowance. As the First Minister put it, one of the biggest debts we owe as a country is to unpaid carers. And in 2015, she said the uplift would be worth £600. But after 3 years of Tory benefit freezes, the Scottish Government website says it is just £221 every 6 months. On Saturday, though, she said at her conference that it would be £500 a year. So could she kindly clarify what the down payment will be worth to Scotland's unpaid carers, if not now, then in writing to the cross-party group, as this would bring some reassurance?
First Minister.
Well, this summer, when we start paying what will be the first benefit through the new social security provisions, the change will bring carers allowance, as the member said, up to the level of job seekers allowance. That will take it from £64.60 per week to £73.10 per week. That money will be backdated to April. It will be paid in 2 lump sum payments a year, and it will put almost £500 into carers' pockets this year. It's a total of an investment of £30 million a year, and will benefit more than 70,000 carers across Scotland. If there's further information that it would be helpful for us to make available to the member, I'm happy to do that. And of course, we will work hard to ensure that everybody who is eligible for carers allowance is aware of that and can access that. All of that, of course, is separate to the new Young Carer Grant of £300 for young people who have significant caring responsibilities, and that is part of a wider package of support that we are intending to make available to young carers. So I hope that information is helpful, but I will ask the Social Security Minister to contact the member to see if there's any further information that she would find helpful as well.
Thank you very much. And that concludes First Minister's questions. We'll move on shortly to members' business in the name of Alex Rowley on Mossmoran flaring But before then, I'll just have a short suspension to allow the gallery to clear and for new guests to arrive. Short suspension.